Salam and welcome to SomaliDispatch.com for all Somali-related news and interviews in English. Please visit us at SomaliDispatch.com and or all of our social media platforms. I'm Abdul Qadir Goulet. Al Shabaab have been waging a war against successive Somali federal and regional governments since its inception in and around 2006. Somalia's most recent federal president, Hassan Sheikh Mohamoud, who took office in May of last year, vowed an all-out war against the militants with a limited success. To discuss why that is and what could be done differently, we're joined by Abukar Arman, the author of Somalia's Age of Terrorism. Abukar is a foreign policy analyst and a former diplomat. He repeatedly wrote about this subject and recently wrote a new article about Somali government's fight against Al Shabaab, which is currently led by the current President Hassan Sheikh Mohamoud. He joins us from his home in the US. Salam Abukar and welcome to Somali Dispatch one more time.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Thank you for inviting me.
Abukar, in your recent article, if you can start us off with how Al Shabaab has morphed into a different entity than what many remember at its initial inception. If you could explain to our audience what you mean by the entity morphing into something totally different than how it started out.
Yeah, and by that I mean the way Shabab started, we all know that it was part of the Islamic Courts Union. And if you recall, that entity was governed in Somalia for maybe 6 months, right around that time, before the Ethiopian invasion and occupation of Somalia for 2 years. They were Shabab was part of the courts. They were the militant aspect of it. They were youth that believed this ideology of ruling by what they consider to be the Islamic Sharia, which was really, it's an open for debate because, as you know, the Islamic Sharia, everybody declares it from wherever they are, whether they're in Afghanistan or in anywhere else for that matter, whether Al-Qaeda or any other group. They all claim Islamic Sharia, but nobody discussed what that means exactly because everybody has a different opinion. That said, their ideology was to rule by Islamic Sharia. And later on, what they morphed to is something other than that. I mean, those hardcore people who still hold those ideology that sees everybody else is wrong and they're the only group that understand Islam, and they feed people their ideology by force. And as you know, Islam, there is no compulsion on the faith because you cannot force matters of the heart, and faith is in the heart. There's no way that one can force another human being to become faithful. Yeah. So going back again, the entity that it became now is a few that are still remaining from the oldest school, whatever names they have. Now, oftentimes these are not indigenous people that we came to know by their name because of the daily messages that they were sending to the people and preaching certain brand of Islam that we know that they mean exactly when they say we want to rule by Sharia. For example, if you recall, when Shabab was in Mogadishu in let's say 2006 all the way to 11, for example. Mm-hmm. They had many mosques, they had many platforms where they were preaching their message. We don't see that anymore. We really don't. We only see that they're occupying this particular territory. They're out there, that place is a no-go because Shabab controls it. Meanwhile, you have other people who use that Shabab thing as an umbrella. They could be individuals who want to assassinate another individuals for business reason, or to get rid of this, clan leader or this parliament member, or and others, of course, there are foreign entities that use this thing as a justification for their presence. for their exploitation and so forth and so on. And that's what the article was focusing on. We cannot treat the entity that exists today as a Shabab exactly the same as the old one, Shabab. This one has so many different phases until we address all of that, which is what I consider to be the real threat, not the brand that we knew as the original Shabab. So
it was fascinating. Yeah, thank you for that. It was fascinating to see and highlight it. The eloquent way which you highlighted the morphation that the metamorphosis that it went through, to how it's now, which you describe as in the article as decentralized franchises with mercenary style of function, which is really and truly a nuanced way of looking at it, because a lot of us might just remember the Shabab that predated what we currently have, which is a religious clerics that actually had a tremendous run for 6 months until the Ethiopian troops invaded Somalia. Having said that, you also have written about the current fight and strategy by the federal government, in which it's addressing this group and it's trying to eradicate its existence. You've written about that and you warned about that, and there are articles out there which are a great read, and we will have them in the description of this interview. But if you can lay out some of the warning signs that you've published and would like to reiterate.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, in the beginning, if you remember, this was packaged as MaSlay Uprising, MaSlay being the indigenous, mostly clan people that are, for the audience, the clan members of a particular clan who were resisting or pushing back against the Shabab dominance. And it started as a legitimate movement during the previous government. This started in 2017 or 18, right around that time. Okay, so it was a legitimate movement. But later on, apparently, some people wanted to capitalize for whatever reason. I still don't have all the facts, but just my analysis leads me to think and say, if you're going to fight Shabab strategically, when you know they're collecting taxes in Mogadishu, when you know there are parts in Mogadishu that you cannot go, you being the government, for example, why go to remote areas chasing Shabab from one area to another, supposedly, and defeating them in one area or another when they're right there, among the 2 or 3 million people that reside in Mogadishu? So my argument was that there's something not kosher in that strategy. And it was not ignorance driven, it was deliberate. I'm talking about the second phase, when it was funded internationally to do it exactly that way. Go out there, chase them all across the remote areas of Somalia. Meanwhile, they're really, today as we speak, by the way, today, there was a really huge terrorist attack in one of military camps in Mogadishu, in the outskirts of Mogadishu, that some reports are saying it have caused a serious damage, and the government's been silencing people. And as they did in many parts of those remote areas that I referenced earlier, it's about 12 or 15 different Tuluin or little villages where soldiers were massacred, literally, in the middle of the night, attacked early in the morning, attacked 200 here, 100 there, 50 there. And it was loss. And that pattern I was critical about, as I was critical of the original intention to chase Shabab all over the country and ignore them in Mogadishu. My argument was, for one thing, it's the money. It's a money issue, basically. As you know, part of it was funded by the countering violent extremism. which really does not have a good reputation in the United States or Canada for that matter. I was there in a conference this summer talking about the very same issue. That fund was really, initially when it was put together, it was not uh, initiated to fight or defeat extremism, okay, or to counter extremism, but really to label a lot of different Muslim communities, and similar to what during the civil rights movement, the Quintal Code, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, counterintelligence program that was the FBI operated against the civil rights movement and all of that. It was fabricated and it was modeled, I should say, modeled similar or after that program. The whole intention was really to divide communities. It happened in Minneapolis, it happened in Columbus, Ohio, and I wrote about this thing about 10 years ago, just arguing this is not really to counter terrorism, but this is to divide communities. So I warned against that initially. And I said countering violent extremism is not a fund that's designed to defeat Al Shabaab. At the end of the day, what it would cause is more division within the very same people that are supposed to be on the same side fighting Shabab, which is what we have today. Now compare the division of Somali among the Somali communities from the day we start chasing around Shabab across the country and today. You have more clan wars today than you did before, and more disappointment in what the government is doing. You have the president, you have ministers that are settled in Busamareb, and recently everybody thought that he was going to come back to Mogadishu, and now he's back to Busamareb, and so forth and so on. Some things that really don't add up. So my argument was 1 + 1 does not equal 3. I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, those people who were involved, who were wearing nice, military gears that made them look like they were fighting. And the people, I said, the individuals who are out there, when you look at their faces, no one looks like they've been out there to fight anybody. Those guys come off of a helicopter and they take a picture pointing to one direction or another. Yeah, we chased them out of this village and we chased them out of that village. In the morning, you will have a massacre, which is something that happened, as I said in the article, more than 12 times. So that's why I was disappointed in the beginning and warned against it. The last title of the article tells the whole thing about strategies. Does embolden or boost Al Shabaab, which is what we're seeing today. So I don't know what is really driving part of it. As I said, I mean, there are a lot of different areas in Somalia, as you're aware, that where illegal mining is taking place, for example. And this was true in the old days with the military government. Something like that were happening because the country is too big, really, for any government to monitor. I mean, we have a coastal line that's one of the longest, if not the longest, in Africa, and that you cannot guard every spot of it. Today, it's even much worse. You have today so many different areas where it's, and I mean, if you talk to the locals, if you look at the pattern of decision making and how the place became Lamagalai of its own, like a good example is Al Bur, for example, and I said a number of times, but no Shabab is going to go there and take over Al Bur when everybody knows that whole region is rich in uranium, and so before, when the Ethiopians were there, U.S. Commissioned the Ethiopians to kind of guard the area for them, and they had their own mercenaries that would conduct illegal mining, basically. And if you look at Google right now, and the Somali gold trade, for example, I mean, you and I know that there is no gold trade that's legal in Somalia. But if you look at and Google it up, it'll tell you like between 150 to 200 $1 million exchanged last year. I mean, there was a trade of that magnitude. Where was it coming from? Because in reality, what it is illegal mining that's taken place. So when they take it to the market, the numbers had to be presented, and it's always a fraction of what really is taking place out there. So all of these areas where the illegal mining is taking place, the story or the narrative is it's Shabab controlled. It's a no-go zone. No one should go. No one should explore. Galgala is one of them. All of these other places that Lamangalai and that no one can go there. Yeah. So that's what I was against it, because my role as a writer, as an intellectual, as an analyst, is to really side with my people, And people ask me all the time, why are you critical of every government? Because I have not seen one that's really working for the public interest. If I see that, I'll side with them on any given issue that they do. With that in mind, I praise them. The only social media I use is Twitter, and I always say kudos to the things that they do good. But I'm not going to support the government just because, it says that it's fighting the Shabab. I need to see what they're going to accomplish in that process, and why is their strategy upside down, or why is item number 1 number 50? So that was what the article was about.
Very well put and very well explained. You ask very critical questions about the subject we've been discussing, which is Al Shabaab, and trying to eradicate them and fighting them and what they stand for. To have U.S. trained troops and U.S. and Western equipped African Union forces under the banner of ATMIS, but to still have Al Shabaab successfully as well defeat them on a regular basis, and to in fact retake positions that they captured, raises bunch of questions, and some of them you highlighted them in the article. Were those rhetorical questions, or were those ideas that you were putting out there? Do you have answers for these very serious and intellectually challenging questions, such as the Al Shabaab logistics capabilities, the vast geographic areas they cover, their numbers, how many fighters they have, how they could be executing such ambushes? When you put all of those together, and I haven't seen that approach yet, where writers and intellectuals actually present the questions needed to be answered, perhaps by the government. What was? Do you have any answers for those? Did you get any respond with answers for those questions of yours? Because they seem to be the questions, the $1 million questions, each of them, to answer. If one wants successfully denigrate or dismiss or get rid of Al Shabaab.
Yeah, and well, actually, fortunately, I got a lot of positive feedback from good people who really, some I knew, some I don't. But I shared examples. The areas where all of these massacres took place, everyone who has seen the pictures or read an article about that knows it was a no man's land. I mean, we're not talking about highly populated area, whereas, we're talking about literally outside villages, or sometimes inside, but mostly outside, where the troops were settled. Here's the question: troops of that number, like let's say you put in 100 soldiers in one of those remote areas, to attack them and kill them all, you're going to need how many? Because at the end of the day, remember, Shabab does not have helicopters or jets or fighter jets or any of that nature, so they have to come by cars to attack.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was given an example that as a young man, there was a program advancing the literacy in the rural area that we spent 6 months in those areas, and I was only 15 at the time. But one thing that you learn, and this is the story that I shared in the article, is that cars, when they're coming from the distance, let's say that it's 10 miles away or so, 10 kilometers away, you can not only hear the sound, but you can see the light of that car coming, those trucks that are coming. We knew this thing every month when our salaries were delivered, 60 shillings at the time. You know, you can hear that Land Rover coming from the distance all throughout the night. Ooh, the sound comes at you. And then the light also brightens the whole area. Locals used to think that their favorite wali or their favorite holy man's grave were illuminating that night or something like that. So the reason I brought that story is because if that's the case, then these soldiers could have heard their attackers way before they arrived and invaded them or raided them or whatever. And they could have heard that. But that's not what's happening. So the question is, why not? Why can they not hear them coming? Why can they not see those lights coming at them? How are these people attacking them? Where are they putting their vehicles or their trucks or whatever they use, or technicals or whatever they were using? Where are they parking? Are they parking the distance and then come in and walk in? Okay, how far of a distance are we talking about? Because if you can hear the car coming from that long, 10 miles, 10 kilometers away, then you certainly knew that you were under attack. That's number one. The second thing is, I also parallel that to a situation that happened in 2011, that I was aware of it because I was working for the government at the time. If you remember 2011, all of a sudden, without any, and in those days you have to know, Shabab was really Shabab. They were strong. They were advocating for really, divisively, advancing the idea of, these guys are kafirs, we have to fight them. And these guys could be people who are Muslims just like them. Forget about the foreigners and all of that. So they were really, the genuine Shabab existed at the time. All of a sudden, in one day, in August of 2011, Shabab just decided to leave Mogadishu without warning anything, abandon every mosque that they were preaching at, just leave the town. At the time, Sharif Sheikh Ahmed was the president, and Muhammad Abdullah Farmajan was the prime minister. They took the credit and they say, wonderful, we beat them. Remember, we don't even have an army at the time. They cannot even. The Shabab was right down like.
If I remember it correctly, I remember, Shabab was successfully shelling Villa Somalia.
Yes, absolutely. Now all of a sudden these guys left. So what happened? Well, what happened was there were a mercenary group that was hired. Whoever paid for it doesn't really matter. But at night they were hunting these guys. They're hunting them down by with their night goggles or whatever they call it, and
night vision,
with night vision or silencers, and these guys will just one by one, boom, 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 boom. They didn't know what hit them and who's coming at them, so they decided to leave and evacuate Mogadishu. Now my question was, they're making this parallel and saying, are we really witnessing the same thing all over again? Because it really does not make any sense to me as a logical person, or any logical person for that matter, to see this thing as this is a legitimate invasion of Shabab, and they did it successfully one time. Okay, I'll buy one time. What about the second one? They did it successfully. Okay. How many times successively within 2 months or 3 months? You have, actually 2 months, I'm sorry. You have 12 times they're doing that. Then, I just can't swallow that. I cannot accept that. So that's what the article was about.
You also eloquently spoke about the president all of a sudden, setting up a command into Samarep. Now, a lot of people optically would praise that and say, "Great, the president is all in. This shows his commitment." But there are some inherent dangers that come with that as well. Even though you don't necessarily have dived into that, but what are your thoughts in the president repeatedly visiting and station, taking command in Samarep? Surely that's got its negative to it, and the biggest one being the president himself exposing dangers to himself and others around him. What could that do to Somalia and to the fight against Al Shabaab, having the president exposing himself like that?
Well, it could really have a major problem in that sense, and it can occur, by the way. He is exposed and being out there. But as I was talking, as I said earlier, our issue is not just Somalia against Somalia anymore. And I know when people are evaluating this thing, unfortunately, the Somali intellectuals and activists and all of that, it's centered around clan politics, which is true. It exists. But the major engines, the big engines that are driving this thing, has little to do with these clan things. His presence there has very little to do with fighting Shabab or clan, because some people connect it to the clan of his, some of his confidants, or, some of the members of the government who happen to be from that area, and they label the blame on them. That has nothing to do with all of these things, because if that's the case, he has done his share a long time ago. Why would he want to sit there for 2 months? He would have just symbolically shown face and give them the credit, and then they can brag and say, we brought the president and this and the attention of the world to this particular spot. I think it's much bigger than that. That whole area, as I said, especially in light of what happened with the Ukraine war and the new competition that's really taking place, that the presence of UAE, which really is rides 3 different horses in the geopolitical game, that you cannot really pin them in one place because for various reasons that I mentioned in a previous article about the UAE. They're a part of that, and you really don't want groups that are already now probably defunct, but the Wagner group and all of those people were candidates of going to places like that and taking over, especially what happened in Chad, and what happened in Niger, and all of these other places. So that sensitivity also, that the U.S. also was really and sitting in AFRICOM and hovering over the airspace by using drones and throwing missiles or shooting missile at this person or that person, but did not really have an influence on the ground. It did not. So now it gives them an opportunity where there is the president is sitting there. There are a lot of things that are happening. I don't even have all of it.
Right.
Makes sense. I'm just raising. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you make a new link, or you add or you solve perhaps a puzzle for some of the readers of this article. You've unlocked some secret, and you actually broke some news here, if I may say so, because a lot of times the confusion with what Al Shabaab does and how it's doing, and with the so-called war on terror that's affecting Somalia and politically and economically and every aspect of life. The conversation never revolved around Somalia's resources being linked to the anarchy in the country. The reason Somalia can settle down for 30 years, illegal mining, which a lot of Somalis do not include in their analytical discussions, if you will. So, to me, when I read this article, it was I really had to read it twice to make the link and see the link that really and truly there are multiple things that are happening in Somalia, and they overlap at times.
Yes.
So with all of this happening with the illegal mining, sure, these illegal miners would, as you suggest in the article, would take cover in the no-go zones. But what is in for Shabab? Are they part of the? Do they get their cut just like they did with the charcoal? What's the link? Is this war about divvying up the spoils of what is? Because as you say, Somalia has a highly trained, U.S. trained forces, well equipped. Even though there's an embargo in the country, the country is awash with weapons. Al Shabaab is not, a group that has a base or headquarters. They're among people and they melted into the society. So there is no known entity called Shabaab that you can actually face off with. What is the link here? What is Al Shabaab's role in this?
Yeah. And a very good question. Well, Shabab does exist. We're not talking about a fictional Shabab. It just transformed. It is different terrorist group. It's not that it does not exist. It does. I mean, there are places where you would really have the actual Shabab, running the show basically. Collecting taxes. As I said, I mean, there are parts in Mogadishu that the government cannot still go. So they're there. Those real Shabab, part of them are. Others are like a mafia, and they're collecting something and using the Shabab's name. But like you said, I mean, there isn't an actual Shabab army that's sitting there that you would fight. I don't believe that. We have not seen that. By the way, in all the wars that you've been hearing, that the government, if this was really, really about chasing Shabab from those areas, you would have seen the pictures engaging one another. I mean, there are people who take cell phones and they all have their cell phones with them. If there's no journalist with them, that they can record fighting them. You see, we chased them out of this village, and they're going over there. You've never seen that. You've never seen even the army going in there into a village and saying, "Here we are. We just took this particular place, and now we rule it." You have seen it in a particular places like maybe momentarily. And then the next month you hear an explosion took the same place. A good example is we cleaned the Shabab out of Iran. I said, well, this is not how it works. I am from Iran. And there are a lot of issues at Iran. Unless you resolve those issues, you're not going to defeat anybody. You may have a moment to celebrate here and there. And that's what's happening already. But look at the damage that the people are suffering from here, okay? The issues between the tribes still exist. And people are dying on a daily basis. Only last month we had those successive explosions in Bulaburti, you remember, while the president was there visiting, There are realities we cannot ignore. So if we want a feel-good thing, yeah, we have plenty of that. We can make songs about it. We can dance over it, and there are videos all over the place, mashallah, tabarakallah. But that's not how you're going to solve the problem.
We can't TikTok ourselves out of the situation.
To the average person, every right to celebrate. That's not what I'm talking about. But the people that should know better, whether they're in the government, whether they're intellectual Somalis and non-Somalis even, who are writing about this issue, those are the ones that I'm challenging with these kind of questions.
So the illegal mining that is going on, I'm trying to lay out a picture. I'm trying to paint a picture for our audience to get a good grasp on the illegal mining that goes on in Somalia and the link with Al Shabaab. Is this war about clearing Al Shabaab of these areas that these nefarious other groups want to mine at? Is Shabaab giving them cover? What is really happening there? Because really and truly, there are other places that Somalis inhabit in East Africa, and this is happening, and there is no Al Shabaab, or Al Shabaab
Right.
is content with just getting their taxes for it. But to to have these countries that are actually and entities that are competing in this illegal mining, and to have Shabab in the mix, how does that play out?
Yeah.
Because this is new. This is news. This is the breaking news in your article,
Right.
which I haven't seen a lot of analysts or even journalists covering this, because a lot of times the fight with Al Shabaab, a lot of Somalis are desensitized to it by its lack of success and tangible successes. It's one step forward, three steps backwards. And Al Shabaab is always part of parcel in what's going on in Somalia. It's drought, it's flooding, it's Al Shabaab, it's corruption, it's Al Shabaab. It's always been there. It's consistent in the anarchy that is Somalia for the last 30 years. But this illegal mining, we knew about perhaps nuclear waste being dumped in Somali seas, Somalia seas, that have resources in it, fishing. These are the things that we Somalis discuss on a regular, but with mining and, especially in central Somalia. And now that, that same region is the theater of this latest fight. Is it a distraction? Is it clearing Al Shabaab so they can mine better? What is happening really and truly? What's the link?
Yeah. Okay. Well, very, very good question. Now, let me give you one example that perhaps will illustrate where I'm coming from.
Mm.
Al Bur, for example.
Right.
Al Bur, you have several clans that are
Inhabit.
there. Yeah. Two of them are very strong, and they happen to be, and I'm just going to go down a little, happen to be the wealthiest, two of the wealthiest in clans or sub-clans, however you want to phrase them, in the nation, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And they're also accused, in one way or another, to have a deal with Al-Shabaab, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because of the nature of the business that they're in, to be accommodated in certain area, and they have to kind of pay them off, so their antennas would not be blown up or all of that.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the case, and Shabab controlled Al Bur, okay, why cannot these two clans go to Al Bur and make it the most beautiful cities in Somalia? Why? Why is Al Bur the way it is right now? Totally abandoned, But people are told Shabab is in there. It's a no-go zone. Don't go there. Why? Why is it always when there's an army that approaches it? How many times we heard that they're very close to Al Bur? Yes. I had a challenge with the interior minister on a debate, such as you and I are talking, and it was on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
I told him the day that you go in there, the government, and settles there, and now you're calling to people of Al Bur, come on back, and now you can resettle back in your city. And you can do that for a while. I'm not talking about just one day you stood in the camera and called me. I said, I will record an apology and tell you I was wrong and I was making up stories and you were correct. Up until now, we don't have it. The reason I gave him that challenge is because he was saying on the air, we're just a day away. We got them all surrounded and we're going to take over Al Bur. I said, when you do that, let me know. The reason I was challenging him is because that whole area, if you were a strategist for the mightiest nation on the face of the earth, okay, and the issue of uranium and how France is being kicked out of Africa and all of this, and you're the second because Niger, US is the second in command, and the relationship is going sour, and that. Now, would you allow people like Shabab to control those kind of areas? Would you have risked that? As a strategist, would you do that? The answer is no. No one would do it in his right mind. So all of these are realities that impact whether we're going to have peace and stability in Somalia or not. And until they're addressed, nothing will go right. So people look at it from so it's those kind of cheap that talks about one sub-clan went in there, the other one kicked it out, and, people are cheating each other, they're betraying one another. All of these rubbish that people debate on, unfortunately, some people that should know better. That is the reality I wanted to put on the table and say, if we really care about that country and those people, let's have an honest conversation on this issue. So it's not just the Shabab. So
Right.
Shabab does exist, but do they control places like Elbur? The answer is no. Galgala? No. What would they be doing in Galgala? All these many years we've been hearing, and we don't even ask the critical question of what are they doing in there? Whether they have a magical city in there that they don't come down from those hills, and that's their place, and you should never go and visit them there. What kind of narrative is that, and who would accept those kind of? Because in those areas you have illegal minings that are taking place. That's why the narrative is don't go there.
So there is no Shabab. One could say maybe Shabab. Would it be fair to say Shabab is doing for mining what they did with coal, for example, charcoal, right? In the Jubas, Shabab was in charge of that trade for a long time until the Kenyan KDF troops, Kenyan troops that later joined ADMIS, got there and took over that city and that business. A lot of people actually claim that the charcoal, until the UN banned it, was a lucrative business for whomever was in charge of Kismayo. Are we looking at a similar situation like that, or is this just like you said, it's like a no-go zone, and the easy answer is, Shabab is in control of that one. They actually are not in control.
And charcoal, and I'm glad you brought that up. They were partners. And they could be even partners in some of these illegal minings that take place as a hired mercenaries, just like the others are. Could there be such a scenario? Absolutely,
it could
yes.
be because given their discipline, right? Like
absolutely, yes.
The unfortunate part is the Somali troops, the SNA, are not known for their discipline.
Absolutely. So could that happen? Sure. These guys are for money. Remember, I said an element, some aspect of it turned into like a mafia style. So they use them. Yeah. Are there others who are teaching the hardcore Sharia-based and telling people that we're going to conquer all the way to Seattle and do this or do that? Are there such people? Yeah. But if there are, how come we don't see as often as we used to? Where is Aldera guy, by the way? What happened to that guy?
Last I heard of him, he was injured.
Right. You see, this is why I question these things, these narratives that was applied in Afghanistan, applied in Iraq, we never learned the lessons. My question is, I want to have an honest, straightforward debate. Is a Shabab a terrorist group? Yes, they are. Should they be getting off in order for Somalia to be stabilized? Absolutely, yes. But is that where the story ends? The answer is no, it does not. Now can we have an honest discussion then on the issue? What are the real issues? So that's why my conversation about that is totally different, because my approach is, I'm not denying that these guys are terrorists, extremists, call them whatever you want.
Thugs, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I really appreciate that, because that's the takeaway from the article, and perhaps this interview as well, because we take a deep dive in these things when you and I get together. I wanted finally to ask you about the status quo, as you described it in your article, which is consistent in Somalia's last 30 years of anarchy. The lustful greed and the attitude that integrity is not necessary in building trust and unity. A very powerful conclusion in your article. What does that status quo mean for Somalia's future?
Well, no, that's exactly. I mean, as you stated, I mean, the problem is that, brother. I don't think we have learned any lesson. I mean, every day is we became like event chasers. The events always dominate the narrative, and you forget about what happened yesterday, the day before. Very seldom you find people that are trying to connect those dots and say, "What are we doing wrong?" Right now, you don't hear people talking about reconciliation, for example. Although, in fairness, you hear more of it nowadays than before. But before it was like, who's at war with one another? We have made up, and we're all good brothers now. We embraced one another. Remember, that kind of an attitude. But in reality, within each clan, you will have you already we're seeing it. Within each clan, there are people
Divisions.
that are fighting. Divisions,
Yeah.
bloody divisions they're fighting each other, killing each other, and so within each clan. So where's the reconciliation? And who's working on that to begin with? So this whole idea of each of those administrations that came, and I said this thing before when Sharif Shah Ahmed put on the military gear, followed by Hassan Sheikh Mohamoud, followed by Farmajo, followed by Hassan Sheikh Mohamoud again. Each one of them, when they put on the uniform, I was saying this is not a Somali derivative. Why was I saying that? I wasn't trying to be, and trying to accuse them of something that they were not doing. I said because that's not our priority. That is the priority of someone else, but not your priority. Your priority is you have realized Somalia went under a civil war for a long time. And in any given civil war throughout history, if you do not reconcile, if some people are not held accountable to the wrongs that they have done, okay, or forgive one another, or what have you, you're going to have that problem for the rest of your life. That basic information, are you saying, or not you, but in general, are we saying that these leaders did not understand? I tell you, they do understand. But the priority that they're read to them is security, security, security. Now, security is a symptom, not a cause of a problem. It's a symptom. That insecurity that we witness, it's because of the condition, because of what happened, because of the civil war, because of the division within these clans, because of the people not coming up with a mechanism to share the power or finish the constitution or any of that. Everything is half done, and we talk about security, security, security. So each one ends his 4 years and still talking about security, security, security. So how many more times do we have to hear that? Is my question.
Right. I appreciate your time, and I will end with this question. And you don't have to answer this now, perhaps in our subsequent interviews. Security for who? Certainly not security for Somalis.
Definitely not.
You raise a lot of good points, and you've opened a lot of eyes, including mine, to take a second look at this issue. And I immensely appreciate your time and your expertise and sharing this with our audience. Have a great evening, and thank you so much.
Thank you likewise. Thanks a lot.